Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris is probably one of the greatest science fiction films of all time. It's certainly one of my personal favorites I've ever seen, and was among one of my first purchases from the Criterion Collection. Buy from the Criterion Collection, they're great. This adaptation of Stanislaw Lem's novel focuses on the story of Chris Kelvin, a psychologist who is sent to a space station in orbit of the planet Solaris in order to investigate sudden reports of erratic behavior in the crew. When he arrives, he is met not only with the crew of the space station, who are behaving very strangely indeed, but also by the visitors, apparitions generated by the planet from the memories of the occupants of the space station, and eventually Kelvin as well. Much of the film deals with ideas of consciousness and reality, which is mostly tackled through lengthy monologues by the characters where they speculate the meaning of life out loud to one another. By the way, this movie's Russian in case that wasn't already clear. But they are also developed more subtly through other means, specifically the point of view the film takes to tell the story. Throughout the film, Tarkovsky uses different points of view to develop key points of the film, whether the visitors are truly real or simply an illusion, and the effect that Solaris has on the character's perception of reality itself. From the moment that Kelvin arrives on the space station, the film is told almost entirely from his point of view. At this point in the film, we know just as much about the situation on Solaris as Kelvin does, and therefore we are just as much in the dark. We discover the events of the film alongside him, sharing in his confusion and fascination when Snout enigmatically announces that they are not alone on the station, and following him as he slowly sees evidence that there is someone or something on board the station with them. However, the main reason the film guides us to identify with Kelvin by using his point of view is somewhat deeper than that, and it begins with him finally learning what exactly is happening on the station. Kelvin's observations of the visitors, and in particular the manifestation of his late wife Hari, are quite intriguing. According to Kelvin, Hari looks and behaves exactly like the original, with some minor exceptions, and as far as he becomes concerned throughout the film, she may as well truly be Hari herself. The visitor Hari is truly a manifestation of Kelvin's point of view of Hari, but herein lies one of the major questions of her reality. The image of Hari is created from Kelvin's memories of the real Hari, every experience they had together, every detail in his mind. But she is only the side of her that Kelvin knew, the side of her that she presented to him. After all, in some ways, nobody can ever truly know the entirety of a person. There are always walls up that could hide parts of someone from another, even people they love. As a result of this, the image of Hari may miss some of the complexities of the real Hari's personality that Kelvin was not party to. However, because she is a manifestation of Hari as Kelvin knew her, as far as he is concerned, she is an exact replica, which is what motivates him to want to stay with her, whether she's real or not. It almost doesn't matter to him whether she is real, he just wants to be with his wife again. Through this interaction, Tarkovsky presents an interesting question about our perception of the reality around us, and, as will be elaborated on later, whether we can choose the shape of that reality. But is there a true consciousness behind this apparition? This is a question the film dances around for the majority of its runtime, and it does so by avoiding giving us many scenes from the image of Hari's point of view. Instead, we watch her from outside, trying to decide for ourselves whether she is alive, or whether she is just a shadow that is programmed to behave like a human would by Kelvin's memories. We see her experience emotions and other feelings from the outside, love, sorrow, even pain when she smashes herself through a metal door after being overcome with fear of being left alone. But we are never completely certain if these emotions and feelings are real. Are they truly emotions that the visitor is feeling, or are they simply responding in the way that Solaris's ocean thinks it should or needs it to? Seemingly, the film does eventually answer this question, albeit in a very enigmatic way. The only time we ever see a moment from Hari's point of view happens later in the film, as the space station is about to leave orbit. After a birthday party of sorts for Snout that ends with Kelvin and Sartorius bickering about whether Hari is alive, a scene in which Hari insists that she feels love just as deeply as the others, Kelvin realizes he's left Hari alone in the library. He runs back to her, convinced that she would be struck with fear of being left alone as she demonstrated doing so earlier in the film. When he comes back to the library, he finds Hari looking at a painting of a winter scene in a town, seemingly lost in thought. At this point, the film cuts to a pull-in shot of Hari, moving closer towards her eyes as she looks at the painting. This is followed by a series of close-ups of the painting, accompanied by distant sounds that are, whilst distorted somewhat, clearly the sounds one would expect to hear in the town in the painting. Voices, people walking to and fro, carriages moving down the street. Whilst the close-up shots are not literally Hari's point of view of the painting, the cut between her face and the painting clearly tells us that she is examining it, and the close-ups are simply a more artistic expression of her interaction with the painting. This scene continues for a couple of moments, and then the film cuts back to Hari, who states that she was lost in thought. This time we truly believe it. While the scene itself is somewhat ambiguous in terms of what Hari was thinking exactly, we know that she was thinking, having her own experience with the painting, having her own reactions and thoughts to the piece. We truly get the feeling now that even if Hari wasn't conscious earlier in the film, she is now. Whether she is a being independent of the image of Hari in Kelvin's mind is a little more ambiguous, but whatever the case, she is, as she insisted in the birthday party scene, becoming human. Throughout the film, we see that Solaris has a strange effect on people's sense of reality, which is made most clear through two moments, each of them from a different point of view. The first of these moments happens earlier in the film, shortly before Kelvin departs for Solaris. This sequence is definitely one of the stranger ones in the film, because at first glance it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the film. Former astronaut Burton has just finished a call with Kelvin's father, and he sits and watches through the windshield of his car as Tokyo passes him by. This sequence continues for close to 5 minutes with no dialogue, and shifts from black and white to color seemingly at random. It's certainly a strange moment, and one might accuse Tarkovsky of being self-indulgent here. However, this moment does carry some thematic weight and might also be classed as a form of foreshadowing, with a little context. At this point in the film, we know that Burton was at some point on Solaris, a pilot who flew for the Solarists who worked there studying the enigmatic ocean below. From a film that was shown to Kelvin earlier, we understand that Burton had encountered something in the Solaris Ocean, an apparition of a child that was 4 meters tall, but still, in Burton's eyes, completely real. Moments before the Tokyo Drive sequence, we learn that Burton had later met the son of a Solarist who had died on Solaris, and that he looked exactly like the apparition in the ocean. With this knowledge, it becomes easier to decode the driving sequence, especially given some of the more interesting stylistic choices. The black and white to color shifts, the shots of Burton's face, blank and disconnected, and the sound design, which takes the sounds of a modern-day city and slowly distorts them, building up across the 5 minutes to a noise that is alien and frightening. While this may not be literally what Burton is seeing and hearing, this sequence is a look at his point of view of the world around him, and we learn that he is disconnected from this reality somehow. The mundanity of human life seems alien to him now. The implication of this sequence is that his time on Solaris and his encounter with the apparition has affected him greatly, and it skewed his perception of the world around him, indeed, his perception of reality. It's something of a tragic moment in this respect, but it also sets up what is to come for Kelvin as well, the things he will see, and the effect that it will have on him. Whilst we observe the effect that Solaris has on Kelvin's sense of reality through his relationship with the Hari visitor, with his choice to stay with her on Solaris and see her as his real flesh and blood wife, despite the lingering questions of whether she can ever be what he wants her to be, the most potent moment in this journey is its ending. After waking up from a fever-induced delirium, Kelvin learns that the image of Hari chose to be annihilated by a process developed by Sartorius, as she saw it would be better for both her and Kelvin. Islands are now popping up on the Solaris Ocean, seemingly in response to a recording of Kelvin's brainwaves being beamed at the planet, and Kelvin briefly ponders whether it would be worth staying on Solaris forever. Snout listens to his thoughts, then politely suggests that it's time for him to go home. The film then cuts to a series of shots of Kelvin's father's home, and we watch as Kelvin walks through the property, glad to be home. The first part of this sequence seems to be from Kelvin's point of view, as we get a series of point of view shots as he looks over the property and absorbs it. But then something changes. There's a shot of Kelvin approaching the house on the property, where he would meet his father, but the camera doesn't follow him, instead staying in place as he walks away from it, as if the film is distancing itself from Kelvin. Ominous music builds, and the film slowly pulls us out of Kelvin's point of view into a completely objective viewpoint. We're no longer watching through Kelvin's eyes, we're watching him. The film cuts to a shot of Kelvin from inside the house, but something is wrong. It's raining inside the house, but not on the outside. Kelvin's father goes about his daily business, apparently completely unconcerned with the water pouring down his back. He greets his son on the porch, and the camera pulls away from the house, revealing it to be on an island in a bubbling and turbulent ocean. Kelvin is not home. He is still on Solaris. But does he know that? This is the final ambiguity of the film, one to which there does not appear to be a right answer. At this point, we are completely removed from Kelvin's point of view, just watching as he greets his father on the island. From what we can tell, it seems completely real to him, but does he know that it isn't? Is he deliberately burying himself in a fantasy version of the world he left behind? Has he forgotten that this isn't real? Does he, in fact, think he's on Earth at this moment? The film does not answer these questions, and it underlines underlines the theme of reality that is run through the film, seeming to make a statement even, that not only can events and places cloud our grasp of reality as it did Burton, but reality can even be what we choose it to be, and what we want it to be. We've observed through the film as Kelvin has chosen for the image of Hari to be real, whether she is or not, and now he's chosen this fantasy world as his reality. It is also interesting to note that the soundtrack for the film is at its most ominous and creepy when the property is revealed to be on Solaris. It would seem that Tarkovsky thinks that Kelvin has made a mistake staying on this planet, and that to choose your own reality in this way is a form of self-harming delusion. Solaris is a complex film, filled with moments that build and expand on the themes outlined above, while also making their own statements. Many of the philosophical discussions on what it means to be conscious end up moving towards the concept of happiness. A through line about nature seems to be prevalent in Kelvin's conflict about bombarding Solaris with radiation, a theme Tarkovsky would return to in Stalker, and the human's inability to communicate well with Solaris to begin with adds a layer about the possibility that we can never understand the cosmos around us. "We need a mirror," Snout says empathically. Man needs man. There are a few other relevant moments of point of view use in the film that allude to these themes that Tarkovsky is developing. There is a poignant moment that comes to mind that happens towards the end of the film where Kelvin, in his fever dream, speaks to an illusion of his mother and laments that he's losing sight of reality. A moment that becomes all the more depressing when one realizes he essentially ignored his own advice and concerns when he ended up staying on Solaris. The layers present throughout the film are what make it so interesting to look at, and it's one of the many reasons it's still talked about and analyzed to this day.